From VOA Learning English, this is the Economics Report. International economists say they are hopeful about Africa's economy. They say economic growth on the continent will increase by as much as 5 or 6% over the next 2 years. That would be the continent's highest growth rate since the worldwide economic recession in 2009. Economic experts say the growth is partly because governments have established policies inviting to foreign investors. They say increased trade among African nations is also growing the continent's economy. And the experts say the growth is widespread. They made the observations in the African Economic Outlook 2014 report. The African Development Bank, the United Nations Development Program, and the OECD Development Center produced the report together. Angela Losigi is a UN Development Program economist and policy advisor for Africa. She says, many people think the growth in Africa is driven by mineral wealth only. But, she says, African countries that are not rich with resources also show economic growth. The report says Africa's top foreign trade partner is Europe. About 40% of African trade is with European nations. The report says African countries traded $81 billion worth of goods among themselves in 2012. The report says East and West Africa are leading the economic expansion. The report says low inflation, especially in energy and food prices, is helping economic growth in Africa. And it says African nations have established policies to cut spending and improve tax collection. For VOA Learning English, I'm Carla Babb.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Economics Report. The Obama administration is seeking to make new trade deals. Among these is the Trans-Pacific Partnership with 11 Pacific nations. Another is a trade agreement with Europe. But getting trading partners to sign the deals and the U.S. Congress to approve them requires negotiations. One of the issues to settle is how nations manage their currencies, or money. Protesters from U.S. trade unions and others questioning free trade say some nations control the value of their currencies unfairly. This can give their exports an unfair price advantage on world markets. And that, the critics say, hurts American workers. Exporting countries gain when the exchange value of their currency is low. Carnegie Mellon University economics professor Lee Brandstetter says this can have the same effect as providing financial support or protection to a nation's exporters. He says it makes exporters' goods cheap and importers' goods expensive. Mr. Brandstetter says nations can change the value of their own currencies by using their money to buy U.S. currency and government securities. Some members of Congress are concerned that the issue of unfairly low currency values will hurt manufacturing jobs. But Mr. Branstetter says such rules could also affect U.S. economic policies, such as efforts to keep interest rates low. The Trans-Pacific Partnership now is almost completed. Some experts say adding currency control wording now could stop the agreement. Under Secretary of State Catherine Novelli says failing to reach a deal could hurt U.S. workers. For VOA Learning English, I'm Carolyn Presutti.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Economics Report. The United States has expressed concerns about China's plan to create a new development bank for Asia. U.S. officials say they have questions about the new bank's system of governance. But some experts say opposition to the new organization may not be a good idea. China and 20 other countries recently launched the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. But some nations, including the United States, wonder whether the bank meets international models for governance and openness. U.S. State Department official Jen Psaki says openness would be important for such an organization. Some observers say the U.S. opposition to the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank is a mistake. Richard Cronin is at the Henry L. Stimson Center in Washington, D.C. He says opposition to the bank is not good politics. But the United States is not the only nation to have reservations about the new development bank. Australian Prime Minister Tony Abbott recently said his government would like to join. But first, he said, it needs the bank to have the kind of transparency found in organizations such as the World Bank. South Korea has said more consideration is needed on the new bank's governance. Richard Cronin also says geopolitical considerations are the biggest reason why the United States and some of its allies have not joined the bank. The U.S. and its traditional allies have funded and worked through institutions such as the World Bank and the Asia Development Bank. China and other developing economies for many years have said they have had little influence at Western-led development banks. For VOA Learning English, I'm Alex Villarreal.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Economics Report. A new report says income inequality is hurting the potential for growth around the world. It says the best way to deal with the inequality is by helping poor people and the middle class. The report is based on an International Monetary Fund study. Opinions about income inequality are not hard to find. Many people are concerned about the issue. Kalpana Kochar is the Deputy Director of the Strategy, Policy and Review Department at the IMF. Recently, she said, the gap between the rich and the poor is at the highest level in decades in advanced countries. And inequality is also rising in major emerging markets. The new report is called Causes and Consequences of Income Inequality, a Global Perspective. Ms. Kochar said, inequality trends have been mixed in emerging markets and developing countries. Some countries are experiencing falling inequality rates. However, inequality in education, healthcare, and finance remain in areas such as Latin America, Middle East, and Africa. The report suggested that policymakers direct their attention on the poor and middle class to create economic growth. The organizers of the study found that a 1% increase in the earnings of the richest 20% of people led to a nearly 1% decrease in GDP growth over a 5-year period. A similar increase in the income share of the poorest 20%, the study found, led to more than a 1/3% increase in GDP. Kalpana Kochar said that is a fairly powerful message for policymakers and researchers around the world. For VOA Learning English, I'm Carolyn Prasuti.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Economics Report. Last week, we reported that international economists released a hopeful report about Africa's economy. The African Development Bank, the United Nations Development Program, and the OECD Development Center wrote the report. It predicts economic growth on the continent could reach 5 or 6% over the next 2 years. Economists expect 7% growth in West Africa's economy in the next 2 years. They say oil continues to be a major source of income, but that other industries are also important. Growth in Nigeria is coming from agriculture, trade and information, and communications technology. Manufacturing is helping Ghana grow. Sierra Leone is the fastest growing country in the area because of its iron ore exports, as well as its agriculture and building industries. In southern Africa, Angola, Mozambique, and Zambia are expected to grow between 5 and 7%. Labor problems and weak foreign export markets have affected growth in South Africa. But that country is still expected to grow almost 3% over the next 2 years. Angela Lusigi is an economist and policy advisor for the Regional Bureau for Africa in the UN Development Program. She says many countries are working to balance their budgets, and they have solid financial policies. She says the next question is how to make those improved policies result in growth that helps all of a country's citizens. She says inequality remains a big problem in Africa. Ms. Lusigi says it is important to have growth that affects all people and not just one group. For VOA Learning English, I'm Alex Villarreal.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Economics Report. The European Union has told Israel it must identify the products it makes in disputed territories if it wants to sell them in Europe. The EU says the new measure makes current rules clearer. It also said less than 1% of Israeli products sold in European countries come from the disputed territories. The EU decision would require products produced in the occupied West Bank, the Golan Heights, and East Jerusalem to be labeled as from a settlement. The Palestine Liberation Organization praised the EU decision. PLO Secretary General Saeb Erekat said, "We welcome this decision and consider it a significant move toward a total boycott of Israeli settlements, which are built illegally on occupied Palestinian lands." Israel sharply criticized the new rule. Officials said the measure would support efforts toward a boycott of Israeli products. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called the EU move immoral. He said, "Of the hundreds of territorial conflicts around the world, it chose to single out Israel and Israel alone." In the United States, a group of lawmakers also protested the EU decision. They said it appears designed to discourage Europeans from purchasing Israeli products. The dispute between Israel and the EU took place the same week that President Barack Obama met with Prime Minister Netanyahu at the White House. The meeting was said to be friendly. It is expected to result in an increase in U.S. military aid to Israel. Israel reportedly wants that yearly aid to rise to $5 billion. For VOA Learning English, I'm Ann Ball.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Economics Report. The political crisis in Ukraine has forced many European nations to reconsider their dependence on Russia for energy. Some nations are looking at new ways to recover natural gas at home. These methods include a disputed process known as hydraulic fracturing, or fracking. The process involves the use of liquid chemicals to break rock. Experts believe Europe might have trillions of cubic meters of shale gas. Shale is a kind of gas-bearing rock. France, Poland, and Ukraine are thought to have the largest amounts of shale gas. Large supplies have been found in Romania, Bulgaria, and the United Kingdom. Lucia Seibert is with the Wilson Center in Washington. She says large shale gas reserves and political problems in Ukraine have increased interest in Europe's shale gas. But Europe is believed to be years away from major shale gas production. Poland, the United Kingdom, and Romania are expected to start exploration by 2020. Removing shale gas through hydraulic fracking is the subject of often intense debate. Most drilling areas in Europe are near populated areas, and environmental groups have raised concerns about water and air pollution from fracking. Much of Europe's gas flows through a pipeline from Russia across Ukraine. But Ukraine has had difficulty paying Russia's Gazprom energy company. And early this year, Ukrainian protesters ousted the country's pro-Russia president. The new government signed economic agreements with the European Union over Russian objections. Now, Russia has signaled it may cut off gas to Ukraine and to much of Europe. For VOA Learning English, I'm Carla Babb.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Economics Report. The value of Russia's money recently dropped by 20% in one day. The ruble soon regained some of its value compared to the dollar. However, the decreasing value of Russia's money has raised fears in Moscow of rising prices. Russia's central bank has increased interest rates to 17% in an effort to support the value of the money. Russian officials are seeking help from some of the country's biggest companies. In December, Russian Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev met with the heads of export businesses, including the energy companies Rosneft and Gazprom. He urged exporters to sell their foreign currency earnings rather than save them in an effort to support Russia's currency. Not everyone is hurt by the ruble's decrease. Russian exporters are paid in foreign currency and can make gains when the ruble's value is low. Importers, however, suffer the most when their currency decreases in value because foreign goods cost them more. Russians looking for goods at stores in Moscow are buying them up because they are expecting price increases. Financial experts say the ruble's drop in value not only affects what buyers pay for goods, it also makes it more difficult for Russian companies to pay foreign debts. This has caused concern that some Russian companies might not make their debt payments. Falling oil prices and Western restrictions over Russia's actions in Ukraine are some of the reasons that the ruble's value has dropped. For VOA Learning English, I'm Alex Villarreal.